Okay, class, this is our second video covering Chapter 8. So, Chapter 8, Part 2 here, where we have finished our discussion of aggregate demand and aggregate supply. You should feel very comfortable with those two curves in our model for the macroeconomy. Some of your questions you'll have to work through are going to involve just aggregate demand or just aggregate supply, but in this video we're going to move on and combine those two concepts into one model where we can observe the equilibrium that's achieved in the macroeconomy. And then once we've done that, we'll be able to make predictions about where the economy would go if there were changes or violations of the ceteris paribus condition that we talked about last time that would shift one of those curves to the left or to the right, and what would happen. Okay, so we're going to talk about short-run equilibrium first, okay, in the macroeconomy, and then later in this video we will talk about long-run equilibrium. And this is going to be a model that you're going to continue to use for the rest of the semester. Okay, so this is a very important model to learn and master. Okay, so equilibrium in the short-run macroeconomy is going to occur when the quantity of real GDP demanded, okay, and I should say demanded in the short run, okay, is going to be exactly equal to the quantity supply of real GDP, again, in the short run, okay? And this is going to occur at only one price level. There is only one price level where these two things will be exactly equal, okay? And we've referred to this as the market clearing price level. Okay, so we want to understand the concept of market clearing. Okay, so instead of jumping right to market clearing price level, equilibrium price level, I think you'll understand this concept better if we go through the situations in which there is not an equilibrium or disequilibrium. Okay, so we're going to talk about two general forms of disequilibrium and how the economy will self-adjust out of this disequilibrium to a short-run equilibrium, okay? And this is something that Adam Smith, would have called the invisible hand, okay? So let's talk about the first type of disequilibrium, and that is a general surplus, okay? So you have already learned, okay, that the short-run aggregate supply curve is an upward sloping function. Okay, why is it upward sloping? Again, we're graphing or showing graphically what you could put in a table that would have both a column of the price level and a column of the quantity of real GDP supplied by producers in the short run. And why is it upward sloping? Because at a lower price level, firms would make a certain amount of goods and services, okay? They'd be willing to make a certain, at this price level, they'd be willing to make this amount of goods and services, produce this amount of goods and services for sale. But if the price level goes up to say here, okay, they're going to be willing to produce more goods and services, okay, and make them available to the economy. Why? Well, remember our assumptions. If the price level goes up in the short run, what prices have gone up? Just the prices of goods and services. So as the price level goes up, producers can sell their goods for more. But input prices, we assume, are fixed. Input prices represent cost to firms. So the price of the goods that they want to sell have gone up, so their revenues can go up. But the cost of the goods to produce the goods has remained fixed because of contracts. So the price of the good has gone up. The cost of making the good has stayed the same. So what's happened to the profit per unit? It's gone up. So what do firms have an incentive to do? Produce more units. And they know this will be temporary because workers, for instance, are going to demand cost of living adjustments after their contracts are up because prices have gone up. So how do you take advantage of this in the short run? You produce more goods and services. Okay? We also know that the aggregate demand function is downward sloping. As the price level goes up, the quantity of real GDP falls, okay? So at a low price level, consumers are willing to buy more goods and services. But if the price level goes up, the quantity demanded in the short run will be lower. Why? We said there were 3 reasons why. The real balance effect, as the price level goes up, the balances in your bank's account are worth less, so you buy less. The interest rate effect, even if you wanted to buy the same amount of goods, an increase in the price level, okay, is going to make it a fixed bundle of goods more expensive, as you're going to have to borrow. That's going to increase the demand for borrowing. It drives interest rates up. And when interest rates are higher, people buy and borrow less. Okay? So increases in the price level are going to decrease your real balances, decrease how much you buy. They're going to increase interest rates, which will decrease how much people borrow and buy. And lastly, the international trade effect. If the U.S. gets more expensive, people in other countries will buy less from the United States. Our exports will fall. Okay? But let's say, okay, currently in the economy, the price level is at, let's say, PLTH. Say that's our current price level. This is what the price level is. Well, what's going to go on here? This would be our quantity demand of real GDP in the short run. Okay? And this would be our quantity supplied of real GDP in the short run. Which one's greater, right? The supply is greater than the demand. This is what we call a general surplus. A general surplus. And what are we going to see with this general surplus? Okay. High inventories. Okay. Low orders. Okay. And I don't know if any of you have ever taken inventory at a retail store or a place of business, but owners of businesses don't like excessive inventories. Okay. I remember working one place, and we were taking inventory, and the owner and the manager were taking the inventory together, and the owner was getting visibly upset. And I remember him saying something along the lines of, you know, this isn't a storage shed. We bring in, you know, in this case it was clothing. We bring in clothing in the back door, we mark it up, we send it out the front door. I'm not storing it here, okay? So we need to get rid of it. And I remember actually him saying, if it's junk, mark it down and get it out. What he was saying is there's a natural downward pressure on price, right? They don't want to hold these excess inventories, right? They want to sell this stuff to consumers, but consumers aren't willing to buy it at this price. So that puts pressure on business owners that are holding these high inventories that they have to pay for, right? They got more trucks coming in tomorrow and there's not enough going out the front door. That puts downward pressure on price. As price starts to drop for all goods and services, okay, so that's price level, we're going to see an increase in the quantity demanded because of higher, as the price level goes down, higher real balances, people want to buy more. As the price level goes down, interest rates fall, people are willing to borrow and spend more. And as the price level of U.S. goods goes down, foreigners are willing to buy more stuff from the United States, okay? But as price level goes down, the quantity supplied will fall, right? Why? Because the price level is going down, the price of the good that the firm sells is going down, but their costs are staying the same, so their profit per unit is going down, so they're not willing to make and produce as many units. And you can see this gap starts to shrink, okay? So when there's a general surplus, owners of businesses are holding high inventories, and they don't want to hold high inventories. What's the first thing you should do if you see milk is on sale? The answer is check the date, because Kroger's is probably feeling pressure to get rid of this milk that they have a high inventory of before it goes out of date, okay? But the same is true for clothes, okay, or any other good. You know, I was working in clothing at the time I had this experience, right? We don't need to have swim trunks, okay, as the winter's approaching. And if these swim trunks aren't going to move at this price, lower the price, get it out of here so I can make room for, you know, the sweaters that are coming in, okay? So this is a natural pressure, okay? Puts downward pressure on price, okay? This high inventory puts downward pressure on the price level. Okay? And this is going to shrink the surplus, as we've seen, okay, as we just described. Okay? That's one type of disequilibrium. And what is this disequilibrium going to do? Force prices down. Okay? But what if they force prices down too low? Again, we have an upward sloping short-run aggregate supply curve. We have a downward sloping aggregate demand curve. But let's say price drops to a price level of PLTL in the short run. Well, my quantity supplied of real GDP is going to be here. All right, I get that off the short-run aggregate supply curve. That's how much producers are willing and able to make at that price level. Again, lower profits per unit. But consumers at this price level, hey, they say, hey, I'm willing to buy a bunch of stuff. There's my quantity demand of real GDP at that price level. What do we have now? A general shortage, okay? We see empty shelves and back orders. Okay? Empty shelves and back orders. You know, it's the case with ammo right now. You can't find any ammunition, okay? The shelves are empty. They're on back order. Over the summertime, a lot of outdoor activities that people may have wanted to engage in kind of increased because other options were eliminated as a result of some of the shutdowns. So things like pools and bicycles. I remember I was at Myers and we were looking for a bicycle, and they said they've sold out of bicycles. This was early in the summer, right? And they said they had never seen that before. Okay, empty shelves, back orders. Now, firms, owners of businesses don't like to see this either, because what does an empty shelf mean? It means a missed sale. It also means an angry customer. Someone comes in and says, "Hey, I want to buy this." You know, it's listed on your website as costing this much here, and you don't have it. Okay? So firms see themselves as having missed a sale, and not just missed a sale, but they know they could have charged a higher price. So if you can't figure this one out, you're not going to be in business very long. I could actually raise my price, not make my customers as angry, because I'd be willing to have more product in the store. Firms are going to take advantage of this when they can. So this is going to put upward pressure on price. Okay? This puts upward pressure on price. Okay? And as the price level goes up, what happens to firms? Firms say, oh, the price of my product's going up, right? I can sell an Intex pool for more, okay? I'm willing to dedicate more of my floor space to Intex pools, or bicycles, or ammunitions, or whatever it is, okay? So the price of the good goes up, but their costs don't change, so they're willing to make more available, okay? So they're moving up and to the right on that short-run aggregate supply curve. But remember, as the price level goes up, quantity of real GDP demanded is going to go down. Why is it going to go down? For the three reasons we've talked about. As the price level goes up, the real balances in your bank account are going to go down, right? The same amount of money can buy less, so you're going to buy less. As the price level goes up, interest rates go up. People are going to borrow less and therefore buy less. And as the price level goes up in the United States, foreigners buy less from the United States. So exports are going to go down. So this is all going to decrease the quantity of real GDP demanded. Okay? and this will shrink the shortage. Okay? So we've seen if there is a general surplus, prices will be pushed down, and they'll keep being pushed down as long as there's a surplus. Okay? And if prices are too low, there'll be a general shortage. Okay? And prices will be naturally pushed up. Okay? And that shortage will shrink. So if there's a general shortage or a general surplus, there's going to be pressure on price to change. So when does that pressure stop? That's going to occur at equilibrium, okay? In short run equilibrium. Okay? Short run equilibrium will occur, okay, when we're at a price level that clears the market. There's no shortage, there's no surplus. So if we drew this graphically, short run aggregate supply, aggregate demand, okay? If the price level is too high, it'll put pressure on price to drop. If the price is too low, it'll put pressure on price to increase. There's only one price level, and I'm going to call that PLE0, equilibrium price level 0. But to be honest with you, over time, I'm just going to drop that E, okay? So we usually just label our equilibriums PL with a subscript, okay? But I'll put an E for my first one here. It's a lot more like a C, but okay? Price level at equilibrium, and that's going to give us one quantity. We'll just call that Q0. But Q0 is where the quantity demanded of real GDP is exactly equal to the quantity supplied of real GDP. And again, this is in the short run. Short run. Okay? So this is short run equilibrium. Okay? There's one price level that clears the market. Quantity demand and quantity supply are exactly equal. This is short run equilibrium in the U.S. economy. You may have noticed, again, I labeled this PLTL. What did that stand for? The price level was too low for an equilibrium. And in the previous example, I labeled it PLTH. Price level is too high. If the price level is too high, there'll be a general surplus, which will push prices down. Okay? And if the price level is too low, there'll be a general shortage, which will push prices up. Okay? The only time there's no pressure on price to change is when quantity demand and quantity supply are equal. There's no general shortage, there's no general surplus, so there's no tendency for the price level to change. And we call this the equilibrium price level, equilibrium quantity of real GDP in the economy. Again, we're measuring real GDP on this axis, we're measuring price level on this axis. Okay? All right, now, okay, so there's equilibrium. This is really where the model gets powerful, okay? So we're now going to talk about changing the equilibrium, okay? Changing the equilibrium. And really the best way to do this is just with some examples. So I'm going to work with some examples here. I'm going to do one, and then I'm going to have you work some on your own, okay? So with all these examples, we're going to assume that the economy is in short run equilibrium. So we're going to start with short run equilibrium. Then something's going to change, okay? Then something is going to change. And I have several examples that we're going to go through. We're going to go through a decrease in interest rates, increase in taxes, increase in nominal price of labor and input price, increase in productivity, okay? These three actually you're going to do on your own. I'm going to work through this one with you, okay? All right, so let's say the economy is in short-run equilibrium. Well, let me get the economy in short-run equilibrium then. Here's my short-run aggregate supply curve. I'm going to label that SRAS 0. I know that's the first SRAS curve that I drew, okay? And I got my aggregate demand curve. We'll label that AD 0, okay? It's the first aggregate demand curve I drew. And I know my equilibrium quantity is going to be right here. That's where I'm on both the aggregate demand curve and the short-run aggregate supply curve at the same time, okay? And so this is my equilibrium price level. So PL0, Q0, okay? Here's my short-run equilibrium. So we've started here. The economy is in short-run equilibrium. But then something happens, okay? What happens? Well, in our first example, there's a decrease in the interest rate. The news announces that the Fed has lowered the interest rate. Well, actually, you learned in the last class that the Fed doesn't change the interest rates directly. What they've done actually is increase the money supply. But the news is going to call that a decrease in the interest rates. Well, you know what that'll do, right? That'll increase consumption, especially on big ticket items like durable goods, new cars, things like that, okay? But it also might get people to buy houses. So we'd see increased investment. And probably even more importantly, we'd see businesses start to invest in new capital, right? So more investment. So increase C, increase I, we know what that'll do to aggregate expenditure. Aggregate expenditure will increase. And if aggregate expenditure increases, we know there'll be an increase in aggregate demand. And we showed in our last video that'll shift AD to the right. Okay? So let's go ahead and institute that change. Here's AD 0, it's going to shift to the right. 81. Okay, remember, think left and right. We've shifted to the right. Okay? Now, prices don't change because of magic, right? This demand curve, and maybe I should have done it in pencil so I could erase it, but this demand curve's gone now, okay? That one's gone. It's dead. There's only ever one aggregate demand curve or one short-run aggregate supply curve. This is the aggregate demand curve. This is the short-run aggregate supply curve now, okay? But the price level's down here. So what's occurring? Go over till you hit the short-run aggregate supply curve, you hit it here. That's my quantity supply. Go over till you hit the demand curve, you hit it here. That's my quantity demanded. Which one's bigger? The quantity demanded. So what do I have? A general shortage. What will that general shortage do? That general shortage will bid the price level up. Right? And so firms will make more because the price of their product's going up, but their costs are the same. More profit. And because of the real balance effect, the interest rate effect, and the international trade effect, as price level goes up, people buy less. Until a new equilibrium is established right here. At PL1, Q1. So what happened? Price level increased. Real GDP increased. And I'm going to add something here. Unemployment has decreased. These two things go together and work in the opposite direction. If you're producing more, you're going to need more people, so unemployment goes down. If you're producing less, you need less people, so unemployment would go up. But here's how to read these results. The price level went up. Real GDP went up. So unemployment must have gone down. Now let me ask you a question. Is this good news or bad news for the economy, based on what you know so far? Well, a lot of times, this will be reported on the news as really great news. Hey, real GDP went up, unemployment went down, that's good news. But remember what our first goal is, high sustainable economic growth. When does that occur? It occurs when real GDP equals potential GDP. Does real GDP at Q1 equal potential GDP? I have no idea. Did we move closer to potential GDP? Maybe. Did we move further away? Maybe. Okay? I have no idea. I don't see my target here. So let's put a bookmark there. We're going to come back to that issue. At some point in time, I need to know if this is a good move or not. Okay? Because I need to be able to evaluate the Fed. Was that a good move by the Fed or not? Okay? But we will come back to that. Right now, I just want you to be able to institute the proper shift of the proper curve, and then tell me what happens at price level, real GDP, and unemployment. Okay? And I want you to do that for the following 3 changes in the economy. All right? So we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to start with the economy in short-run equilibrium. Okay? We're going to start with the economy in short-run equilibrium. Then I want you to show what would happen with an increase in taxes. And you want to do it graphically like we did up here. Then start over. The economy is in short-run equilibrium again. Then show me what happens if the nominal price of labor and input goes up. Okay? Tell me what happens at price level, real GDP, and unemployment. And then start over again. Assume the economy is in short-run equilibrium. Draw a graph, okay? And then show what happens on that graph if labor productivity increases. Tell me what happens at price level, real GDP, and unemployment. Okay? So pause this video now, okay? And you should have drawn 3 separate graphs, and you're going to make something similar to a change seen here. Okay? Obviously, you might have different curves that move in different results on price level and real GDP and unemployment. Okay? So go ahead and pause the video and do that on your own. Okay, so hopefully you've done this. I'm going to go through this relatively quickly, but let's say there was an increase in taxes. An increase in taxes, if it was, say, an income tax, you'd certainly see a decrease in consumption. If it was a business-based tax, a decrease in investment. But either way, you're going to see probably some of both. If it was an income tax, you'd see a decrease in consumption, decrease in investment, probably more in the form of new housing purchases. If it was a business-related tax, you'd see a much bigger decrease in investment from decreased capital purchases, but some decrease in consumption as well. But we know that would decrease aggregate expenditure, which would lead to a decrease in aggregate demand. Okay, shifted to the left. Here's 81. This demand curve is now gone. Okay, so what's going on at PL0? I'm on my short and aggregate supply curve about here. I'm on my aggregate demand curve here. Short run, the quantity supplied is bigger than the quantity demanded. We have a general surplus that would push prices down, which would increase the quantity demanded because of the real balance effect, interest rate effect, and international trade effect. Would also decrease the quantity supply because the price of my product's gone down, but my costs stay the same. Okay, until a new equilibrium is established here at PL1 Q1. So the price level has gone down. The quantity of real GDP has gone down, right? Price level down, quantity down. And if the quantity goes down, the unemployment rate is going to go up. Those two move together. Okay, that's what you should have gotten for the tax one. Is this good news or bad news? Again, this would probably be reported as bad news, right? GDP's down, unemployment's up. But remember, what's our most important goal? Did we achieve potential GDP? I don't know if this move from Q0 to Q1 has moved us closer to potential or further away. So I can't really judge, is this good or not? Okay? All right, another one, change in nominal wages. Okay? So the economy is in short-run equilibrium at PL0, Q0. There's an increase in nominal wages. Okay? That's an input price. Right? We assume in the short run that input prices are fixed, but we're violating that assumption, so we need to change the position of our short-run aggregate supply curve. This curve assumes that input prices are fixed. We've changed input prices, so I need a new short-run aggregate supply curve. Well, so it's going to affect short-run aggregate supply. Which way is it going to impact it? Well, if an input price has gone up, that means the firm is going to be able to purchase less of that input. If the firm can purchase less of that input, they're going to generate less output. So that's going to decrease short run aggregate supply. Shift the short run aggregate supply curve to the left. SRAS1. Okay? This short run aggregate supply curve is now gone. There's only one short run aggregate supply curve and one aggregate demand curve. Right? So at this price level, I'd be on my short run aggregate supply curve here. I'd be on my aggregate demand curve around here. There'd be a general shortage that would bid price up, which would increase the quantity supply because the price of my product has gone up, but the rest of my input prices have stayed the same. So my profit per unit goes up, so I make more. Quantity demanded is going to go down. Okay, why? Because my real balance, as the price level goes up, my real balances are smaller, so I buy less. Interest rates go up, so I'm going to borrow and buy less. And foreigners are going to buy less in the United States because it's got more expensive. Okay, until a new equilibrium is established. That new equilibrium will occur at PL1, Q1. So what's happened to the price level? It's gone up. What's happened to real GDP? It's gone down. Okay, it's gone down. Price level's gone up. Real GDP's gone down. And if real GDP's gone down, that means that the unemployment rate is going to go up. These two things are linked. Okay, so that's what your answer should have looked like for an increase in nominal wages. All right, increase in the productivity of labor. Okay, well, that's one of those things that we were holding fixed in the short run for the short run aggregate supply curve to look the way it does. Okay, so that's going to affect the short run aggregate supply curve. Okay, it's going to increase it or decrease it. Well, you've increased productivity. That means we're going to produce more. Increase the short run aggregate supply curve. So there's SRA as 0. I'm going to increase short run aggregate supply, so I'm going to shift it to the right. Okay, shift it to the right. This one is now gone. Okay, so at this price level, this is my quantity supplied. My quantity demand's back here. The quantity supply is greater than the quantity demanded. I have a general surplus. That's going to push prices down until a new equilibrium is established at PL1, Q1. Okay, so in this case, the price level has gone down. The quantity of real GDP, I can just say real GDP. Real GDP has gone up, and so the unemployment has gone down. Is this good news or bad news for the economy? Well, you might have just said in your head, well, we don't know yet because we don't know where potential is. This one's a little different. We know that increases in productivity are increases in potential. So this is an increase in potential. We'll talk more about this in a minute, but this is a good thing. Increases in potential are a good thing, okay? Because that means the economy is capable of producing more. All right? Okay, so hopefully you got those right. You'll have more questions like that to do. All right, so now let's move on to the last part of this chapter, and that's our discussion of the long run aggregate supply curve, okay? The long run aggregate supply curve. And that's the quantity of all goods and services supplied, measured in real GDP, in the long run. Ceteris paribus. Remember, ceteris paribus is all else equal. That Latin phrase, all else equal, okay? So we want to talk about this long run now and what it means, okay? So in the long run, we're going to make some assumptions, okay? There are some assumptions that keep us in the long run. What are these assumptions? Well, just like the short run, we are going to assume that the prices of goods and services change easily, okay? They're flexible. Okay, they're flexible. They can change easily. We assume this in the short run. Okay, so if you want to change the price on a can of soup, you can do it almost instantaneously. If you want to change the price of how much you're selling your gas per gallon, just type it in the computer and it pops up on the board outside. Okay, so this assumption is the same as it was in the short run. What was our second assumption in the short run? Do you remember? Our second assumption in the short run was the price of inputs are fixed, if you recall. Well, that's going to be the distinguishing feature between the short run and the long run. In the long run, the price of inputs can change. Okay? They're flexible. They're not fixed by contract anymore. Okay? You can think of it as contracts have expired. Okay? Contracts have expired. They're not fixed by contract anymore. Okay? Now, we are going to assume that potential GDP is fixed. That's so, again, we can draw the curve. It's just going to mean when potential does change, potential can change, but when potential changes, we're going to need a new long-run aggregate supply curve. Okay? But these are the important assumptions that are going to generate our long-run aggregate supply curve. Okay? Just like these were the assumptions that generated the positively sloped short-run aggregate supply curve, these are the assumptions that are going to generate what our long-run supply curve looks like. Well, what's that going to look like? Well, if you remember from 230, the goal of the firm was what? From 230, principles of micro. What was the goal of the firm? The goal of the firm was to maximize profit. Okay? So they needed to find the quantity, find the Q that maximizes profit. Okay? So let's say I found that Q. Let's put it right here. Okay? So I'm a firm, okay? And I have found that this is my profit maximizing Q. Okay? Let's say at this price level. At this price for my product, okay? This is my profit maximizing Q. Okay? And let's assume all firms are doing that. They're all maximizing their profit. So at the current price level, they're maximizing their profit. But let's say the price level goes up to here. And we're talking about the long run. How much should I produce to maximize my profit? Well, in the long run, if the price level goes up, what does that mean? It means the price of goods and services have gone up, right? So the price of my product has gone up. But it also means what? The price of my inputs have gone up proportionally. So if this is my profit maximizing quantity at this price level, and let's say the price level jumps by 10%, what does that mean? It means the price of my product is going to go up by 10%, but my costs are going to go up by 10%. So what happens to my profit per unit? It hasn't changed. So if my profit per unit hasn't changed, should I change the number of units that I produce? The answer is no. I should produce QN again. What if the price level drops down to here? All right, so I should stay at QN if it's here. What if it drops back down to here? Well, the price of my product's gone down by 8%. Okay, but my costs have gone down by 8% as well. So how much should I produce? I should produce QN again. Well, what if it goes up 5% from there, right, to here? Well, the price of my product's gone up by 5% because the price of products change easily. But if we're talking about the long run, the price of my inputs have gone up by 5% as well. What's happened to my profit per unit? Nothing. So how much should I make? QN again. So this, connect these dots, that's your long-run aggregate supply curve. The long-run aggregate supply curve is a perfectly inelastic curve at QN, and QN is potential GDP. Okay? So our long-run aggregate supply curve is a perfectly inelastic curve at potential GDP. And now we have our target, okay? This is our target. This is how much we want to produce, okay? If we're over here, okay, this is going to be above potential, right? And the unemployment rate is going to be less than the natural rate of unemployment, okay? And over here, we're going to be below potential GDP. And so the unemployment rate is going to be greater than the natural rate of unemployment. What's going to occur at QN? We're going to have the natural rate of unemployment. That's going to be equal to the actual unemployment rate. They're going to be equal to each other, right? So here is this is our target, okay? This is what we want the economy to achieve, okay? Now, just like before, be careful. Changes in the price level don't shift the long-run aggregate supply curve. They just move us up and down the curve. But they're not going to change quantity in this case. We're just going to move up and down the same curve. Well, what shifts the long-run aggregate supply curve? And the answer is anything that changes what we're holding fixed. What were we holding fixed? Well, specifically, we were holding potential GDP fixed. Okay? So increases in potential are going to lead to increases in long-run aggregate supply. Okay? A shift of the long-run aggregate supply curve to the right. Here's long-run aggregate supply 0. Here's long-run aggregate supply 1. It's going to move us to the right. QN 0, QN 1. Okay? Now we're going to cover changes in productivity more in detail in chapter 17 on economic growth. But what increases potential GDP? Increases in resources or increases in the productivity of resources or increases that we just call beneficial supply shocks. Remember, we talked about these with short-run aggregate supply as well, okay? So that list of beneficial supply shocks it's the same list that's going to shift the long-run aggregate supply curve. So with short-run aggregate supply, what were the things that we were holding fixed? Input prices and potential. So if input prices or potential change, we shifted the short-run aggregate supply curve. With the long run, we're only assuming potential's fixed. So any changes in potential are going to change long-run aggregate supplies, right? These would all increase potential GDP, which would shift things to the right. Long-run aggregate supply 0, long-run aggregate supply 1. Again, price level on this axis, real GDP on this axis. Okay, and any decrease in resources or decreases in the productivity of resources and you can go back to that video for some examples, or what we would call adverse supply shocks. And again, these are all bad news for potential. These decrease potential GDP. Okay, these are going to, all these decrease in resources, decrease in the productivity of resources, or adverse supply shocks. I don't really need the arrow. Adverse supply shocks are going to decrease potential. Okay, and again, that would look something like this. Here's LRAS 0, QN 0. It's going to shift things to the left. Long run aggregate supply 1, QN 1. Okay, I guess this way. QN 1. Okay, we decrease potential. Okay? All right, but we'll talk more about these things in some you need to know them now. You need to know them for short and aggregate supply. But we're going to cover these again in chapter 17. Okay? In chapter 17, we will cover after we talk about the self-adjusting economy in chapter 9. Okay? All right, one last thing to cover in this chapter, and that is long-run equilibrium. Okay? Long-run equilibrium. This is going to be our goal. Okay? Long-run equilibrium. Let's show it graphically. Okay? We got price level here, quantity. I can just put, I keep doing that. Real GDP is fine here. Okay? Let's put our long-run aggregate supply curve here. Long-run aggregate supply 0. Here's QN. This is potential GDP. That's our goal. Well, in long-run equilibrium is when your short-run equilibrium is when short-run aggregate supply and aggregate demand, where they intersect, right? If they intersect on potential, that's long-run equilibrium. PL 0, QN 0. Okay? QN is really just it tells you where potential is. But this is what Q is equal to. Q0 is equal to QN. Right? So think about our three goals for the macroeconomy. One is high, sustainable economic growth. Now we're going to talk about this a little bit more later, but at least in terms of what we want at any moment in time, okay, is we want a part of this meeting this goal would be real GDP is equal to potential GDP, right? Well, that's what we get in long-run equilibrium. Okay? So, great, first goal. What's our second goal? Price stability, right? Price stability. In equilibrium, prices no longer have pressure to change. Okay? And I should maybe be specific and say in long-run equilibrium. Okay? In long-run equilibrium, prices no longer have pressure to change. Great. And what was our third goal? The actual unemployment rate is equal to the natural rate of unemployment. And what do we see in long-run equilibrium? Check. Okay? So in long-run equilibrium, we achieve the three goals for the macroeconomy. Now the question is, are we going to achieve this? If we can achieve this, will it happen on its own? Or will we need policy? And that's going to be part of the discussion for the rest of the semester. But just to kind of give you a preview of coming attractions here, in the next chapter, chapter 9, we're going to see that the economy will achieve long-run equilibrium. In other words, the economy will achieve our three macroeconomic goals by itself. Again, we use the phrase equilibrium for a reason, The reason it's an equilibrium is because that's where this, remember, an equilibrium in science is where a system wants to move to on its own to be at rest. Okay? If you throw a rock into a pond, you're going to throw it out of equilibrium, but without any interference from you, because water wants to seek its lowest level, those ripples will slowly die down and it'll become placid again. Okay? Why? Because that's equilibrium for water. It's going to achieve equilibrium at the lowest level. Okay? Well, the economy is going to achieve equilibrium as well, both in the short run and in the long run. In the long run, equilibrium will achieve our three goals. Okay? Now, that's what we're going to kind of prove in our next chapter, chapter 9, that's entitled The Self-Adjusting Economy. So we will talk about how the economy will self-adjust to this, to long-run equilibrium. Well, then you might ask, why would we ever engage in policy to move the economy if the economy can achieve equilibrium on its own? And that certainly is the position of some economists. The government should just stay clear. But other economists would argue that although, yes, we believe in long-run equilibrium, and it'll achieve it on its own, we might be displeased with the amount of time that it takes, and some economists think that they could help it along with policy. And that'll be kind of where the discussion goes in this class after the midterm. Okay? So we'll stop here for now and be prepared in chapter 9 to talk about how this will be achieved on its own without any policy interference in the long run. Okay? All right, guys, God bless, and we'll talk to you soon.